Secret of the Mimic is finally here, and after months of anticipation, we finally get to talk about what this game has to offer in terms of lore. Now, keep in mind that everything I'm going to discuss here is still very fresh, and the community is far from reaching a consensus on what most of it means. With that being said, what are we going to tackle about this game? Today, I thought I'd delve into some of this game's implications for the original timeline. Now, already I'm sure alarm bells are going off for some of you. There's a particular theory which this video is going to build off, which has been controversial in the community since a few of us started discussing its potential back when the game came out. But that being said, I implore you to watch this video all the way through, take what I say into consideration, and then hit me with all your rageful feedback in the comments below. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, strap in, because it's gonna get wild. Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump into what I think Secret of the Mimic changes about Ultimate Custom Night. If you watched my livestream of Secret of the Mimic as it released, which you can still go back and check out, link on screen, you know that throughout the game, Edwin Murray is given a lot of credit for creating some of the less explored characters and concepts in the franchise. Edwin is the inventor behind the Mimic technology, but is also responsible for having created the earliest versions of the Mediocre Melodies, Candy Cadet, Trash and the Gang, Sun and Moon, Monty and Roxy, and even the very concept of recycling.
I am recycling. Edwin Murray coined the term, and it will soon be an
Edwin Murray invented recycling! It seems that MCM is the one-stop shop for FNAF character backstories, just like Oscorp in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, or like one prequel movie's worth of Han Solo iconography. Alright, here's your gun, here's your spaceship, here's the AI on board your spaceship, and here's a best friend for life. Now, that all comes to about a trilogy and a half worth of content. Now, admittedly, some people are falsely attributing some other character's creation to Edwin as well, something I was definitely guilty of during the stream myself. However, I think the game gives us just enough wiggle room to still give William and Henry the cred for designing the classics, the puppet, and even the original Springlock suits. Of course, later inventions like the Funtime and toys might be influenced by the Mimic. I'm looking at you, Circus Baby Chip. But for now, Edwin's only directly responsible for these side characters. Oh, and his wife designed Chica. We'll get back to that later. But why am I talking about this? Well, we know that in Pizzeria Simulator, Henry's goal to gather all the sins of Fazbear's past results in Michael at least purchasing some of, if not all of these MCM inventions. And where does the FNAF 6 fire lead? Straight into Ultimate Custom Night, William Afton's personal hell designed for him by...
He's here and always watching.
Discussing the identity of the Vengeful Spirit in UCN is one surefire way to start a flame war in any comment section or Reddit thread it's brought up in. People will argue for hours as to whether Cassidy, the supposed spirit cohabiting Golden Freddy with the Crying Child, or Andrew, a Frights character who fulfills a very similar role, are the true one that William shouldn't have killed. But I'm not here to debunk Stitchline Games or even to say that Cassidy isn't still a good contender for the one you shouldn't have killed. However, I think that Secret of the Mimic has a lot of new, very interesting connections to this mysterious character, and may just give us the most evidence-backed answer after all these years, with one major issue I'll discuss shortly. So, who do I think could potentially be the Vengeful Spirit, the one William shouldn't have killed? Well, none other than the spirit haunting MCM itself, David Murray. Okay, I know a lot of you have already rushed to disagree, but stick with me and try to see where I'm coming from here. I have found a ton of ties between David and the Vengeful Spirit, but of course the glaring issue with this theory off the bat is that David wasn't killed by William Afton. Or was he? I promise I'm going to answer that question later, but I'd like to start by showing you all of these connections that made me even consider that possibility in the first place. As mentioned, the story of Ultimate Custom Night is that William Afton, after having been burnt in the FFPS fire, is being held in some sort of purgatory, his sins regurgitated back at him to torture him for eternity. The entity holding him here is referred to as the one you shouldn't have killed by multiple characters in the game who seem aware of his presence. And in some rare voice lines, the Vengeful Spirit even speaks through the mediocre melodies. At the time, this seemed like a very strange choice for literally any character in the running for the Vengeful Spirit role, and it's here where we reach our very first strong connection to David Murray.
Me and Stan are out of here. It's time to jump ship before things get ugly. I have a bunch of Fiona's character patterns and Stan is taking what he can. Join us. With everything we know about the restaurant project, we can start our own machine shop.
The Stan referenced here in this log is undoubtedly the owner of Stan's Budget Tech, the company from whom we buy the mediocre melodies in FFPS. Those character patterns stolen from MCM were the mediocre melodies, and Stan's rip-off versions are the characters through which the Vengeful Spirit chooses to speak. And wouldn't it make sense for the son of their creator to choose them as his avatar? A boy who spent days wandering through his father's factory and was constantly drawing himself with these characters as his only friends in the world. And Pigpatch, the one member in the Mediocre Melodies lineup that doesn't have the Vengeful Spirit's voice, except for Mr. Hippo, still has a connection to David through the exact same heterochromia, one green eye and one blue eye. Let's keep going. In Secret of the Mimic, we get a super deep cut, which sort of answers a lingering question fans had since all the way back when Sister Location was first being teased. In the source code of Scott's website for one of these teasers, the restaurant Chica's Party World was listed as one of Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals clients. At the time, we had no idea what this meant, but Secret of the Mimic randomly decided to show us that Chica's Party World was one of the precursor restaurants in operation before Freddy's. In one of the logs, we find out that Fiona even designed Chica, making her the first known Freddy's bandmate in existence.
I was the first. I have seen everything.
So, sure, Chica's the first. So what? Well, despite some other FNAF theorists already having reached the conclusion that Chica the character was the first, rather than Susie being the first victim or something like that, it still never sat right with me. Why does it matter that Chica, the fictional brand icon, existed before Freddy? Even when playing through this game, I was surprised to get clarification on this matter so many years after that Sister Location teaser. But then, friend of the channel T-Dreads pointed out Chica's other very important line in Ultimate Custom Night.
I have seen him, the one you shouldn't have killed.
I have seen him. None of the other characters in UCN who reference the Vengeful Spirit say that they've seen him. But given we know now that this is indeed the character Chica who is speaking here, then she definitely would have seen David running about the factory. This finally made sense to me as to why it would even matter for Chica to mention that she was the first. She's letting William know that even the crimes he's committed away from Freddy's won't escape him. And there are even more connections between UCN and the Steelwool games. However, to talk about this next one, I'm going to need to talk about Moon.exe. Now, those of you familiar with all three endings of Secret of the Mimic are well aware that Moon.exe is anything but simple. It's a game within a game which halfway through becomes a recreation of the game you've been playing this whole time. None of the characters are literal, everything is a metaphor, and my theorist friends and I have been racking our brains ever since the game came out to solve this minigame. However, one thing pretty much everyone agrees on is that this baby owl, which appears in the earlier, far less literal part of Moon.exe, represents David Murray. There's a lot of stuff I just said that if you've not played the game make no sense to you, but this video is already going to be long enough, so just go back and watch me play it. At one point in the game, we come across this pond in the middle of a dark woods. Now, I don't know about you, but when I come across any body of water surrounded by trees in any FNAF media, my mind instantly jumps to Old Man Consequences from FNAF World. Now, of course, we have to be careful about taking very common symbols and attributing them to lore. But that being said, take a look at this. Right up from the pond, laying next to a boulder where the baby owl is perched, we find Monty's fishing game. Our character notes that he would play this all day long, undoubtedly drawing our minds to David. For years, we've said that Old Man Consequences is represented by an alligator, but we've never known why. But now, we have a direct connection between David Murray's memories of this fishing game and OMC. Why would Scott draw this connection if there was no actual link between David and this mysterious character? And remember, OMC, while introduced in FNAF World, has his arguably more notable appearance in Ultimate Custom Night, where he urges the Vengeful Spirit to rest and leave Afton to his demons. We know, thanks to Help Wanted and Help Wanted 2, that this character is also Old Man Consequences, but here, he doesn't take the form of an alligator. Why? Because in those games, we're not viewing this world through the lens of David. We're seeing it through the eyes of the princess, who, right now, I think has the best chance of representing Vanessa. So once again, we have another UCN character being tied back to Murray's costume manner and the old characters designed by David's parents. Now, even if everything I've brought up so far doesn't have you convinced, let's look at Ultimate Custom Night as a whole. What is the Vengeful Spirit actually doing to create this place beyond death? To torture Afton, the one you shouldn't have killed, regurgitates his killer's misdeeds, recreates his memories, mimics William's past. One thing people have debated about since UCN came out is whether or not William and his captor are alone in this purgatory, if the other spirits are trapped here as well. But when you have a character whose entire shtick is to copy and pretend to be other people, the answer becomes clear. And in case you think it's a stretch to say that David the Spirit would behave like the mimic, take a listen to David's ghostly voice lines echoed throughout MCM.
Daddy's everybody. Why don't you go outside and play?
I baked it myself for David's special day.
Even in death, David is forced by his current vessel to mimic his memories and the memories of others. But how does all this tie into the new storyline? Well, I'm glad you asked. Throughout Security Breach, Ruin, and Help Wanted 2, we find Nightmare's Own plushies scattered about the Pizzaplex, Old Pizza Place, and even within Princess Quest 4. We even have staff bots painted to look like nightmarish versions of themselves with razor-sharp teeth and stripy arms. We've never known why this character in particular is so prevalent throughout these new games, and it honestly seemed like a pretty random inclusion on Steelwool's part. Well, not anymore, because with this theory in mind, I think I have an answer. If F10 is still around in the modern era, which she almost certainly is, then her entire goal, as established in Secret of the Mimic, is to revive David by any means necessary. I think that means that David's spirit is still lingering throughout the Pizzaplex, still haunting the ruins of what was once his father's factory, wearing the guise of a character who is literally the face of Ultimate Custom Night Nightmare's Own. I think these plushes might represent David's continued existence into the present story. Whether or not he's still torturing Afton's soul is unclear, as if Glitchtrap is the real William who has somehow escaped from UCN, then David will surely want to drag him back to Purgatory along with him. But I think David's presence in the current story expands far beyond his spirit lingering. As we see in Secret of the Mimic, David is simultaneously possessing the Mimic and projecting himself as the White Tiger throughout the building. Some people think that M2 isn't possessed at all and that the White Tiger is actually David, but I'll remind you that David's ghost voice repeats M1 and M2 lines, which I think is Scott's way of telling us that ghosts can both possess an animatronic and project beyond it, while still being bound by their programming, sort of like a familiar golden bear. We also have Gregory, who many theorists have come to the conclusion that he's some sort of recreation of David. I'm sure if you've been in this community for a while, you'll be familiar with this concept, dubbed the Another David theory. There are plenty of videos on this subject, so I'm not going to go over all that evidence here, but what I will say is that I think the Sticky Note Room and Security Breach is showing us Gregory's mimic brain learning to become another David. We have this trail of binary chicken scratch, which evolves into rudimentary drawings, and then when we get upstairs, we see that there are pictures of Glamrock Freddy everywhere, along with images which are shown in Gregory's hideout in the Pizzaplex. But this room has not just got sticky notes in it, it's got nightmare staffbot heads. The influence that David has over this room is palpable. And yet, there's another character this room also seems to be influenced by. In this sticky note room with all these ties between Gregory and David, we also have this table. We've got staffbots dressed in various costumes, a blue-haired woman at the head of the table, a magician, a red pigtailed girl, a boy, and another boy missing its head. This is undeniably the Afton family. In case it wasn't clear enough, we have a collectible Fredbear's Family Diner poster sitting right in front of the magician bot. But why put the Aftons here in a room so clearly dedicated to David? Well, it makes you wonder. that Crying Child staff bot is missing his head, and these Nightmare-own heads are scattered all about the room. Some of the sticky notes depict images of a bear, one with a diminutive body almost like a toy, and one really close up like a POV shot looking up at a looming beast. There's lots of birthday imagery involving friends and a happy cake. Okay, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here any longer. David Murray and the Crying Child are being heavily associated with one another, not only through this room, but plenty of other Security Breach and Secret of the Mimic imagery. All those Gregory connections I made earlier, well, it turns out Crying Child is given some very specific detailing which ties him to Gregory. I'm sure you've all seen this image from Game Theory's infamous Gregbot theory, and while I don't believe Gregory is literally a robot version of the Crying Child or David, I think Game Theory were closer than we all gave them credit for. This theory is the one I referenced earlier in the video. God, David, as it was coined by T-Dreads, is the theory that through some yet-to-be-known method, the Crying Child is actually another David, in a similar way to Gregory. Admittedly, I don't have time to go over all the evidence, so I recommend you go to watch his video on the subject after this one. Lots of people have been accusing T-Dreads of being on several illicit substances to come up with a theory like this. However, I am going to plant my flag in the crazy hill right next to him because I think that this theory is not only likely, but very well could have been Scott's plan from the start. Of the Steel Wool era, at least. There's no way he knew what a mimic was back in FNAF 4. There's even a tiny detail which I'd never seen until coming across this tweet the other day. There's a painting hung right next to the staff bot table with a sticky note with the binary for "Why is I" stuck to it. The file name for this painting texture is Alberi de Legno. Alberi de Legno. Alberi de Legno. Alberi de Legno. I don't know. Alberi de Legno. Alberi de Legno. Alberi de Legno is an Italian phrase which literally translates to wooden tree. From what I can tell online, this seems to be an Italian tradition where these fake trees are built from wood and then decorated for Christmas. At first, I had no idea what this could mean, but thanks to a live stream where I brought this up, chat helped me decipher the meaning behind this very odd inclusion. These wooden trees act as a metaphor for the mimic. They are fake trees being built out of the remains of real trees. By creating one, you are essentially taking the pieces of something that was once alive and rebuilding it into a facsimile of the original. That's what Gregory is, taking the pieces of David, or in this case the Crying Child, and restructuring them to become a replication of the original. Again, not saying Gregory is literally a robot, but instead a mimic-controlled organism, much like Vanny. Some people in the community have suggested that Scott was always intending for Gregory to be a recreation of David, not the Crying Child, but as a result of the miscommunications he discussed in one of Dawko's interviews, Steelwool thought Gregory was meant to be the Crying Child. However, if this is the case, and Scott is trying to steer things back on track to his original intention, then why would the Moon.exe ending of Secret of the Mimic lead us to a FNAF 4-styled bedroom? Sure, it's not one-to-one, but it is absolutely a deliberate visual reference. A lot of people have particularly criticized God David because they would consider it a retcon. Retcons, or retroactive continuity, are something that Scott said way back when that he is vehemently against doing. And I'm not calling him a liar. I just think that maybe Scott's definition of a retcon might be a lot looser than other people's. Scott doesn't like to change details on a whim, nor does he want to flat out contradict anything already present in the games. However, I think that Scott is constantly adding new context to the story. For example, nothing about sister location says that the events of FNAF 4 didn't happen. It only provides a new lens through which we can view the events of that game. In the same way, God David doesn't suggest that Scott is rewriting any of the old story, only that he's adding on details earlier in the timeline to better weave it all together. And to be entirely fair, Scott was already writing about robot essence transference all the way back in 2015 with the start of the Silverized trilogy, and has continued to write about it in almost every FNAF book series since. This is not a new concept, nor is it impossible that he had something of the like in mind back in the day. We never did find out what was in that box, did we? But okay, I've spent this entire chapter of the video defending an idea I haven't even really gone into yet. What the hell would this mean for David being the Vengeful Spirit? Well, I think there's actually a lot of evidence within UCN itself for the bite victim to be the one you shouldn't have killed. And if God, David, is correct, then all of our David connections would tie in as well. And don't worry, I'm still going to get around to the big glaring issue with both of these suggestions. As mentioned before, Old Man Consequences is a character introduced in FNAF World, a game entirely centered around putting the crying child back together. Some, including myself, even believe that the entirety of FNAF World is occurring within the crying child's broken mind. Look at this map layout. It's shaped like a brain, with a very dead zone right where his frontal lobe should be. Old Man Consequences exists in the deep recesses of CC's subconscious, and if we travel there, we're represented by this 8-bit sprite which the community has dubbed Redbear. At the beginning of the game, we're told that the player character has been created for one thing, to set his broken memories in place so that the MCI can use them for their happiest day in FNAF 3. I think that Redbear is an aspect of CC's subconscious, a part of himself traveling through his own mind to put himself back together. There is even a source clue code from back in the day which says he put the pieces together. If Bite Victim is the one you shouldn't have killed, then it makes sense that these two characters, Redbear and OMC, might make their reunion in UCN. Old Man Consequences in this scene would be urging the now put back together Bite Victim to rest his own soul. There are several FNAF World characters who can appear randomly on the desk, not to mention Dee, who plays a very important role in the gameplay of UCN. One of my favorite pieces of Bite Victim the one you shouldn't have killed evidence is the Redbear of Vengeance cutscenes, which are unlocked by beating different challenges in the game. We've got 3 characters, Freddy, Foxy, and Mangle, all dolled up as ancient samurai rivals, with the bear vowing vengeance each night on the fox, and Mangle acting as Foxy's hype man / comedy relief. This game is weird. I don't know if I have to spell it out, but Bite Victim and Michael are repeatedly represented by a bear and a fox throughout the series, and Mangle is the only toy we see in Elizabeth's room back in FNAF 4. So, we have a show called Redbear of Vengeance, with the titular vengeful bear acting as a stand-in for the crying child. The first episode even occurs on the bear's birthday. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't that give us evidence to say that Michael is actually the one being tortured in UCN? And while, sure, one could argue it that way, I think the framing of these cartoons tells us about CC's life, not his afterlife. We see that the bear is constantly on the back foot in these cartoons, never succeeding against the fox, who forces him to do chores, sort of like an older brother might if he was giving his younger brother a hard time. One of the endings is even at Christmas, which kind of ties it back into that Barry Delegno thing from earlier. Anyway, from these cartoons, I think we're supposed to infer that CC is actually more likely to hold a grudge than we may have first realized, given his behavior in FNAF 4. These intermissions are unlocked every 700 points, alternating between Redbear of Vengeance and Toy Cheek at the high school years, which we know represents Afton and his victims. So we're getting CC backstory and William backstory interwoven with one another. There's also a ton of Golden Freddy imagery throughout UCN. Go watch 14 Theory if you somehow managed to avoid seeing that in the last few months. That means we're linking the Vengeful Spirit, who is referred to with male pronouns, to a spirit which is within that animatronic. Now, I know some people, including myself, have argued that those pronouns are referring to the character of Golden Freddy, not the spirit, which could still be the case, but considering Scott uses the image of his son as the Vengeful Spirit, and all of these connections to the Bite Victim, maybe we were too quick to dismiss this evidence. Some people think that Scott said in the past that this image of the one you should not have killed is non-canon, but all Scott said in his Reddit post was that he and his family were not canon, meaning his son, Jason Cawthon, isn't literally the Vengeful Spirit. He wasn't saying that the Vengeful Spirit doesn't look like him. It's exactly the same as above, where he says he himself, Scott Cawthon, is not canon, but the indie developer mentioned in Help Wanted does happen to look like him in universe. And of course, the final image of UCN, the reward for having beaten 4920 mode, is this cutscene of Golden Freddy twitching, fading into the void. Some people have interpreted this as the spirit of UCN moving on, finally taking Old Man Consequences' advice. However, I think what we have here are two incompatible endings, same with any of the other games. The one where OMC convinces the spirit to move on is the good ending, and the one where William beats his greatest challenge is the bad ending, where CC is left to try and torture Afton forevermore, constantly in agony alongside his victim. The two endings are also essentially polar opposites in how you achieve them. But of course, with the suggestion that the crying child is indeed the one you shouldn't have killed, comes the greatest flaw in the entire theory. William Afton did not kill his son. Michael Afton was the one responsible for his brother's death. Wasn't he? There is a chance, however slim, that Scott wanted us to infer from all of this imagery that the crying child was in fact a victim of William's. That's why the name is so on the nose. It's telling us that we'd misunderstood FNAF 4 this whole time. Let's go back and look at that final cutscene from FNAF 4.
You're broken. We are still your friends. Do you still believe that? I'm still here. I will put you back together.
This final line is followed by CC flatlining, vanishing into darkness, swallowed whole by the void around him. We've known since Sister Location that it's likely Afton was actually the one speaking through the Fredbear plush the entire time. It's sitting in his office next to the Nightmare Chamber screens, and he also uses the same language to instruct Michael to put his sister back together after her untimely death. We even have this line from Nightmare Fredbear, definitely representing CC in some way, from UCN.
We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them.
I wonder if CC's flatline wasn't just him passing on as a result of his injuries, but instead an intentional pulling of the plug by Afton. William would know that until he could manipulate his son's soul after death, he would never be fixed. If Afton intentionally ended his son's life in a twisted pursuit of reviving him, then the crying child could absolutely be a contender for the one you shouldn't have killed. If you think that's a stretch, listen to Toy Chica's final words in the last intermission before we unlock the Golden Freddy cutscene.
But tomorrow is another day.
Scott is reminding us that William was the Fredbear plush, trying to draw our minds back to FNAF 4 and making us question how his son could be the Vengeful Spirit. We even have this secret Afton victim represented by a foxy hook, potentially a hint that this is Cece's death, as it was spurred on by Michael's actions. Now, being completely honest, I'm not a huge fan of the idea that this very important event where Afton takes Cece out of his bed and brings him to the Golden Freddy suit and spring locks him or pulls the plug on him or whatever it is, occurred off screen. And we're supposed to figure out that happened by deducing a separate answer which on its own makes very little sense. Kind of feels like beating a square peg into a round hole and then going, see, I told you it could fit. That being said, all of this FNAF World imagery combined with Bear of Vengeance, 14 Theory, and Golden Freddy, everything except Bite Victim's demise seems to point towards Cece being the Vengeful Spirit. So yeah, thank you for watching and oh. What's that? I'm being reminded that this is a Secret of the Mimic theory, and I've been talking about Crying Child for way too long. And now it's worse because I'm repeating everything into the microphone. Okay, jokes aside. How does this all tie back into David Murray? We have an explanation for the crying child's death, but maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. Considering all these connections to David Murray, maybe Scott is deciding to clarify things by making another one of Afton's victims be the reason for... Wait, no, David Murray wasn't killed by Afton either. He was killed by a white van.
I was sent a package by Steel Studios. It's a Fazbear Entertainment van.
Alright, before we jump to any conclusions, let's look at the evidence surrounding David's death. The community was first introduced to David Murray in the Tales from the Pizzaplex story, The Mimic, wherein Edwin Murray, still grief-stricken over the loss of his wife in childbirth, raises their son David alone in his run-down linen factory. Edwin builds the Mimic as a friend to play with and essentially babysit David, while he's busy working on projects for Fazbear. Then, on the day of his 4th birthday, Edwin rushed out into the brilliant morning sun and breathed in a mouthful of humid air just as David's ball bounced out into the nearest lane of traffic. Oblivious of the oncoming white van, David dashed out onto the highway. As I've already said, Secret of the Mimic goes out of its way to confirm that Tales is set in a completely different continuity. Now, that being said, the Tales story sort of primed the community to make certain assumptions about the game's story going in. Sure, the details were very different, but the broad strokes, if you squint a little, are pretty much the same. That means that when we saw this ball belonging to David and found out that he was killed on factory grounds, we all assumed that he died in a similar accident to the books, unless you're Candy Bunny. Edwin even has an audio log speaking to his lawyer about how David's playground is built too close to the loading bay. However, I'm not sure that things are as simple as they seem on the surface. After David's death, F10N4, the mimic program mimicking Edwin's dead wife, speaks to Edwin at home about the death of their son.
Edwin, it doesn't make sense. It's terrible, and there's no logic behind it.
Doesn't make sense. No logic behind it. It's an interesting turn of phrase for a robot to use when seemingly describing an accident. I mean, building your son's playground too close to active heavy machinery and then him dying as a result? Unexpected? Maybe. Tragic? Most definitely. But illogical? I don't think so. The fact that Fiona here is a program, which is shown throughout the game to be less connected to her emotions than she might let on, means that her using this language to describe David's death might betray that there's more to this story than we realize. In fiction, logical actors usually attribute illogical results to difficult to understand human behaviors, not accidents. I wonder if this log might hint that David was killed intentionally by an unknown person. Let's keep digging to see if there's anything else we might come to understand about Afton's potential involvement in David's death. Throughout the game, William Afton's presence is made very well known. Through employee logs, we discover that Afton is working for Fazbear Entertainment in some unknown corporate position. I say working for because this game pretty handily confirms that William and Henry couldn't have founded the media conglomerate themselves. The company seems to have existed all the way back in the 1930s, given this Fredbear's Singin' Show poster. Note the pie-cut eyes, low ticket price, and the fact it's printed in black and white. The accompanying advertisement record we find in this game has Fazbear Entertainment's name emblazoned on the back, which means that unless Henry is pushing 100 years old by the time of FFPS, he probably didn't found Fazbear. Same goes for William. Anyway, in these company logs, we discover that William is attempting to ruin Edwin's company and poach all of his employees for Fazbear.
We are almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that for me, and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of our new franchise locations?
Ken, after one interview, they offered me the job. It happened so quick. No questions about my work or skills. They asked one question. When can you start? I'm gonna make double what I make here. You should come with me. There's a referral bonus if we can get more Murray employees to jump ship.
We would love to have you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are awaiting your response.
These are just a small sampling of William's looming presence over the entire game's story. I think we're able to infer a few things from his behavior here when we compare it to his previous appearances. Stop me if you've heard this one before. William Afton, jealous of a business associate's success, drives up outside that associate's place of business and sees their child who has been left unattended outside the building. William kills the child and speeds away, right before an animatronic designed to protect the child discovers their body and is infused with that child's spirit. William then goes on to systematically destroy that partner's livelihood so that his own venture can swoop in and become the top dog in their industry.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Murray's Costume Man, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
That's right. I think William Afton's murder of Charlie Emily and his targeting of Henry's business was actually a repeat of what he did to Edwin Murray, establishing this ruthless killer's MO. If you're wondering why Afton would try to tank Freddy's after clearly working for Fazbear to start Freddy's in the first place, I think it's all to do with Henry taking over that restaurant while Afton keeps working at Fredbear's like we see in FNAF 4. Once Fredbear shuts down after the big bite, and then Circus Baby's Pizza World fails as well, Afton needs his next venture to succeed. As Hand Unit says, Freddy's closure sets the stage for Entertainment and Rentals to swoop in and steal the limelight. He even goes back to try get the reopened Freddy shut down in FNAF 2. Going back to Afton's methods, there are a few more ways we can link Fazbear to David's death. In the lead up to Secret of the Mimic's release, Steelwool pulled some viral marketing by sending a handful of FNAF YouTubers packages filled with swag promoting the game. One such item was this white van paperweight I showed earlier.
Not the same colors as the van in the render we saw.
John here is correct. It is different to the van that Arnold drives in-game, and even the one parked outside MCM belonging to the previous team. It's specifically a white van. And in the Tales books, as mentioned, David is knocked down and killed specifically by a white van. As we've already gone over, these books are not in continuity with the games. But what if this detail could be hinting that a white van was still involved in David's death? But in the game's continuity, it's a white Fazbear Entertainment van driven by Afton. I'll admit, this could just be a result of whatever company made these for Steelwool not having the right color material, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. Fazbear Entertainment, the YouTube channel, not the company and universe, also found that in David's secret hideout in the Storytime showroom, one of the pictures David's drawn features himself holding a pair of balloons, colored and placed identically to the Fazbear Entertainment logo. He's even wearing a purple party hat, which we know is symbolism Scott has been using recently to indicate Afton's victims. It's reinforced in this game as well, where David's birthday table is set for 5 other people with purple and yellow party hats, as well as a black top hat sitting next to one of the plates. All of this, to me, seems to invoke Happiest Day imagery, especially given that we have to fix what is broken in the secret ending of the game. But, okay, admittedly, some of this evidence is less than nail-in-the-coffin material. However, once we combine it with what we know about David's ties to Gregory, Gregory's ties to the Crying Child, the Crying Child's ties to the one you should not have killed, and the one you should not have killed being a victim of William Afton, all of this is looking possible. But that's just it. It's looking possible. I think it's time we talk about this theory as a whole and what my goal was for this video. So, after everything I've presented, do I actually think that anything I've said is 100% the case and undeniably true? Well, no. Not really. There's a lot of wish-washy evidence or big gaps between points which are yet to be filled. However, do I think what I've presented today is a valid way to interpret the evidence? Absolutely. You see, when the FNAF theorizing community started back in the good old days of Purple Phone Guy and Foxy is a Good Guy, there was very little information for theorists to go off. We had a handful of games worth of story with not a whole lot of said story being super clear. Night-to-night gameplay was the closest thing we got to a plot back then, and all of the lore was to be deciphered and created within the mind of the theorist. Over time, Scott has provided us with more and more narrative in each new release, and with the latest Steelwool games, we've got 3-act structures, character arcs, action set pieces, the usual suspects for AAA games. This franchise has changed a lot, but that's not a bad thing. However, theorizing about these new games has become an interesting balance between deducing and predicting. We're no longer just dealing with solving one game, we're also trying to foresee where Steelwool are going to bring us and how all of that fits into the wider timeline that we already have. I think a lot of people are still in the mindset of the older games, where each game is to be solved, where we can come to a pretty good consensus and put a stamp of approval on almost all the answers, when, in truth, the next game Steelwool produces could completely throw everything we think we know into disarray. That's why when people say theories like God David or Vengeful David are ridiculous or stretching connections, they're not wrong, but they kind of miss the point. To understand some of the details in these new games, we sort of have to make those leaps if we want to fill in the gaps before they're filled in for us. Even when the books came out and revealed this huge backstory from the games, The games then contradicted like 90% of it. My point is that in the next game, we could have some new character we've never heard of before step out of the shadows and go, I was controlling Fiona the whole time, and I used M1 to kill David, and I'm the moon in the basement, and I secretly built the nightmare experiment chambers, and I replaced William Afton's son with a robot when he wasn't looking. A lullaby. And if that happens, theorists will just have to shrug and say, yep, I never saw that coming. In that context, everything I just said here today would be absolute insanity, but it wouldn't be a million miles away either. So, sure, there are maybe some more solid theories I could have tackled on Secret of the Mimic, but this game has led me to better appreciate what theorizing in the Steelwool era can be. Think of it like trying to finish a jigsaw puzzle, but one where you don't have the box. Right now, we have maybe half the puzzle finished, so we don't yet know what the full picture is going to end up being. Some of the image is pretty clear, while other parts are a little less easy to understand without their surrounding context. Theories like the ones presented in this video are focused on that empty space, an attempt to guess what the finished jigsaw is going to look like based off of what we can make out on the edges of the pieces we have in place. Other theories, like for example Candy Bunny's Moondrop theory or Gibby's Moon.exe interpretation, are more like interpreting the images on the parts of the puzzle we already have completed. Both are valid, but neither have the full puzzle put together. Now, of course, you can have your preference for which style of modern era theorizing you prefer, but as I'm no stranger to a bit of self-indulgent fanfiction myself, the predictive method is something quite attractive to me when it comes to these newer games. But what do you think? Am I insane? Is there absolutely zero evidence for anything I've suggested, and I'm even crazy for trying to predict it in this way? Tell me in the comments below, or leave your own crackpot interpretation for where the next Steelwool game might be headed. Doesn't matter how crazy it is, this is a safe space, go for it. For those of you who missed it, I recently turned on channel membership, so if you like what I do and want to support me, that's a great way to do it, while also getting access to some fun perks coming in the future. Or just subscribe and hit the notification bell, that's a huge help as well. I promise the Reboot 2 video is coming soon, I just couldn't pass up talking about Secret of the Mimic while the hype is in full swing. I'm very excited for you all to see it, but in the meantime, if you missed any of the secret content that went along with the first Reboot video, I recommend you head over to my community tab and see if there might be any little bits you missed. Thank you to all my current channel members, Classics Theorists Arcadias and Samuel Doherty, Withered Zealots Blue Rendition W and Carson DeFox, and of course my unwithered truthers, Jonah Myers, Just Because, Yan Verb, Epic Fart, Dexwash, Sauces Beston, Pika Pete, Bentley Draws, Peanut Butter Sandwich, and Ben 10 Screams.